The Raiders, as expected, are interested in moving up from the number 13 overall spot in the upcoming draft, but maybe not as high as most of us expected or wanted. That plus a whole lot more comes up on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast from March 5th, 2024.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
Welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. To get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available, as always, you're checking us out on YouTube. Thank you. Show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of you and because of my man, Ari. Ari does a great job every day, making sure we're on YouTube, looking good and sounding good. We definitely appreciate his efforts. On Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. As many of your calls and texts as possible. Coming up in segment number 3, a lot of feedback from not only the Combine weekend, but also Monday's show. So we'll get as much in as possible coming up in segment number 3. Segment number 2, I had an opportunity to catch up with my guy, Jeff Howell from The Athletic, on Monday on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, Raider Nation Radio 920. He had a really good breakdown that he wrote about in The Athletic about the top 6 quarterbacks, talking about Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix. So I had an opportunity to catch up with him on Monday, and he gave me a little bit of a breakdown. And this comes from not Jeff Howell, but from evaluators and coaches around the National Football League. A lot of really good stuff. You'll hear that conversation coming up in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, news and notes of the day, as I always do, and we'll jump into it after I tell you about the title sponsor, which is FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins, just like that. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I'll tell you a lot more about them later on in the show, but let's go ahead and jump into the news and notes of the day. And I don't think there was any surprise when I saw the note that the Raiders are interested in trading up from the number 13 overall spot in the upcoming NFL draft. I was surprised when I saw that it was from 5 to 7, around that range, as opposed to 2 to 3 range. And this is according to Deshaun Reed and Vic Tafur from The Athletic. They put out, the Raiders have explored trading up from pick number 13, according to sources. It'll be tough to move into the top 3, but they've also inquired about picks numbers 5 through 7. Doing so would only make sense for a quarterback. So to me, again, it's a little bit disappointing because I want them to go to the top. I want them to go up to number 2, number 3 in efforts to get Jaden Daniels. I think that that's what they should be doing. That's quarterback number 1. Obviously, that's the guy that Antonio Pierce wants. And, you know, that's just, again, it makes a lot of sense with what I think the Raiders need to do moving forward. 5 to 7 range, that's in the what? J.J. McCarthy range? And, I mean, I guess there's a lot of good things that could be said about him. I'm just not 100% sold. I'm really not. I know there's been a lot of really good things I've heard from a lot of good talent evaluators that are a lot smarter than me. But for my money, J.J. McCarthy, to me, just doesn't seem like that guy. To me, if the Raiders were to draft J.J. McCarthy, it would feel like a little bit of a letdown. I've let it be known many times who I'm really high on. One is Jaden Daniels, obviously, and 2 is Michael Penix. And neither one of them might end up being worth the salt. But those are the 2 guys, for my money, that I'm looking at. So J.J. McCarthy, I think he's the guy that could be had in that 5 to 7 range. Joe Alt, offensive tackle from Notre Dame, he's the guy that could be had in that 5 to 7 range. And who knows, maybe it's a move to make another move. Maybe they're trying to get up to that 5 to 7 range so they can make a move to the 2 to 3 range a little bit later on. Maybe it's like a chess move, right? One chess move to another chess move. I don't know. But the 5 to 7 range to me doesn't really sound real promising. But it also doesn't sound like it's completely out that they've had efforts to try to move up to the top 2 or 3. Because again, it says the Raiders have explored trading up pick from number 13, according to sources. It'll be tough to move into the top 3, but they've also inquired about picks number 5 through 7. So to me, it feels like that there is interest and there has been conversations about 2 to 3, but it's going to be pretty tough to get up to that spot. So we'll continue to monitor that. But again, from 5 to 7, I'm looking at J.J. McCarthy, Joe Alt, and maybe a move to make another move. We'll see what happens moving forward. Also on Monday, found out that the Broncos were officially going to release Russell Wilson when the new league year opens on March 13th. It's not something that's a big surprise, something that we all saw coming. But on Monday, the Broncos made it official. They even tweeted out that, hey, Russell Wilson's been informed he won't be around. They're taking on $85 million in dead cap money for basically to say, Russell Wilson, we don't want you around. So officially, again, on March 13th, he'll be released. He'll be a free agent out there. Any team could pick him up, and his contract should not be really expensive because the Broncos are going to have to eat most of that salary. They're going to pay most of that salary. So wherever he decides to play ball in 2024, whatever team that is, they could sign him to a very cheap deal and knowing that Denver is going to pay the majority of it. So, could he be the veteran quarterback that the Raiders are looking for at a very cheap price? I don't know. Just throwing it out there. I think that all options are probably on the table. I've said it multiple times that I think that the Raiders need to revamp that quarterback room. They need a veteran. They have Aiden O'Connell, and I think that they bring in a rookie as well. So could he be that veteran? Possibly. Justin Fields is still out there, and he has a trade market that's apparently a small market. A lot of teams have not stepped up to the plate, so that decreases his value each and every day. I think that's something that got to get wrapped up pretty quickly. So I guess Justin Fields is still possibly in play for the Raiders. I'm not real high on that move. I don't think he's proven it with his arm consistently that he could be that guy. And the last thing I want to see in 2024 is a frustrated Devontae Adams consistently, like we saw a lot of him frustrated in 2023. A lot of the shoulder shrugs, a lot of the head down, throw balls that are being thrown behind him where he's getting lit up by the defenders. Like, I don't want to see Devontae Adams go through another season of that. And I think that Justin Fields is too inconsistent as a thrower to be that guy, but he's the guy that's possibly out there. Kirk Cousins, he's not going to be able to be franchised by the Minnesota Vikings, so could he make a return to Minnesota? Sure. Could he end up somewhere else? Sure. I think right now the leaders in the clubhouse for Kirk Cousins is probably Atlanta, Washington, and Minnesota. I guess the Raiders could be a long shot, but he's going to cost a lot of money. And could it be other as far as the veterans go? Sure, but there's not a lot of veterans, I think, that are out there. I mean, you got Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, Tyrod Taylor, guys like that, right? You want to talk about Band-Aids. Those are the ultimate Band-Aids that I think that Antonio Pierce really wants to avoid, and I think it would be a great thing to avoid that. So could the Raiders kick the tires on a Russell Wilson and see what he's got? See if he's humbled? I'll tell you this, I don't think that he's going to survive and make it anywhere if he's not humbled. What he did in Denver, when he went in there and thought he was the end-all, be-all, clearly that did not work. Denver gave him a boatload of money that they didn't have to do, and they gave him the carte blanche to basically do whatever he wants around the organization. That ain't going to fly with the Raiders, or I don't think that's going to fly with any other organization. He hasn't proven that that's his worth. So if he's not humbled, I don't think he's going to make it anywhere. If he's humbled, realizes he's not that guy anymore, maybe he's got a little bit left in the tank, but even then, I'm not 100% sold. I know that, he'd be a different dude in the Raiders locker room, the way that they like to operate, but winning is the ultimate deodorant. So if they were to find ways to win games, I think he'd fit in just fine in the Raiders locker room. But again, they'd have to find ways to win games, and he'd have to be a humble dude. He couldn't be one of those guys where he thinks that he's separate from the rest of the team. Also today, 1 p.m. Pacific time, teams need to designate their franchise tag if they're going to put a franchise tag on a certain player. The Raiders will not do that. So the Raiders will not be using their franchise tag this year. Don't have to worry about that. Of course, Josh Jacobs was the franchise tag recipient a year ago. The Raiders don't have any. The Dolphins, they decided that they're not going to tag Christian Wilkins, their defensive tackle. He's only 28 years old. That's a guy that the Raiders could pay attention to if they want to bolster that defensive line. If they're not going to go after a guy like Byron Murphy in the draft at number 13 overall, maybe a Christian Wilkins, again, at 28 years old, still has enough years to have something good left in the tank. Maybe the Raiders could offer him a nice free agent contract. Chris Jones is going to be a guy that's going to end up returning to Kansas City. The Ravens, Justin Matabuke, who I really like more than Chris Jones, is only 26 years old. The Ravens have already said if they can't get a long-term deal done with him, they will tag him. So expect him to be tagged by 1 p.m. Pacific time. The Chiefs, L'Jarius Sneed, the cornerback, has been tagged, but he could be had for a sign and trade. I don't know if the Raiders would be interested in that. I'm not really interested in a sign and trade, but the Chiefs have slapped the tag on him, the non-exclusive tag, and they also last week gave him permission to go out and seek a trade if he could find one. And the Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins, he was slapped with the tag. That could also be a sign and trade type situation. I don't think the Raiders need a wide receiver. That would be a luxury at this point, so I'm not looking for them to make a move there. And then interesting, is what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have going on. We found out that Mike Evans signed a 2-year, $52 million deal. He's not going anywhere. Sounds like their safety, Antoine Winfield Jr., is about to sign a long-term deal there, so he's not going anywhere, which would mean what? The franchise tag is available for Bucs quarterback Baker Mayfield. I don't believe he's going anywhere. I don't think Mike Evans would have signed a deal if his quarterback was going to be gone and they didn't know who his quarterback was going to be. So it looks like that's all coming together. I've said it multiple times. I don't think Baker Mayfield's going anywhere. So he's going to be there in Tampa Bay, and it looks like that's close to being a done deal. But I wouldn't be surprised if they can't get a deal done by the 1 p.m. Pacific time, that they slap that franchise tag on Baker as a placeholder to try to really get a long-term deal done, something similar to what Daniel Jones got with the Giants a year ago. Coming up in segment number 2, how about a breakdown of the rookie quarterbacks, the top 6 quarterbacks in the upcoming NFL draft? Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, and Michael Penix Jr. Whatever order you want to put them in, it doesn't matter. You'll hear from Jeff Howe from The Athletic. He was a guest on my radio show on Monday. Really good breakdown from what he was hearing from evaluators and coaches. Not his just rankings, but evaluators and coaches, something that is way more important than what we're talking about. You'll hear that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, I do want to tell you about one of the great sponsors here on the show, which is BetterHelp. And a lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it and do it better. And I think we all need to have that kind of time to sit back and realize and figure out what means the most to us. If you're thinking about starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Again, BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want you to hear the conversation I had on Monday with my guy Jeff Howe from The Athletic. Does a fantastic job covering the NFL like a glove. He had an opportunity, and he wrote about it in The Athletic. You can check it out. Breaking down the top 6 quarterbacks in this year's upcoming draft, guys that are going to be selected early, maybe 5 of them in the first round, maybe 6 of them in the first round, for all we know. But we know who the usual suspects are, right? Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, whatever order you want to put those 3 in. Then Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, and Michael Penix, whatever order you want to put those 3 in. But we started off the conversation just talking about the top quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels, and how much of a gap there was with the talent evaluators and coaches that he talked to between Drake May and Jaden Daniels for that number 2 quarterback spot behind Caleb Williams.
It was probably 2/3 of the way with May ahead of Daniels. But I think the really interesting thing here is over the last month or so, Daniels has really solidified himself among that top 3 in the gap. Even if you are a May type of advocate or supporter, the gap between 2 and 3 really isn't as big as it was at the end of the college football season. And that it was really, going into this before this past month, it was like, all right, well, where is Daniels going to go? I mean, it could be anywhere in the top 10, top 12, but right now those guys are going to be off the board 1, 2, 3 in whatever order it happens to be. Again, Williams is going to be the first pick, whether it's the Bears or somebody else trading up. I would expect it to be the Bears. People around the league believe the Commanders are bigger on May, so it looks like May has a pretty good chance to be the number 2 pick, and that would leave Daniels for the Patriots at 3. If these things continue to hold and people around the league truly are accurate in what their beliefs will happen there at the top.
Was there any kind of concern with Drake May by the season that he had in 2023 as opposed to the really good season he had in 2022?
Yeah, there was, absolutely. I mean, he was pretty inconsistent, and he was inconsistent against ACC competition, which is not ideal. The tape wasn't great. Actually, there were times when the tape was bad, according to evaluators and higher-ranking executives I've spoken to about him and all these other guys. So that is absolutely a concern. He's not a slam dunk prospect. I mean, I don't think there's like a Trevor Lawrence in this class. Caleb Williams might be pretty close there. But, yeah, I mean, that's why some people do think that Jaden Daniels is the second best quarterback in the draft, because you look at his trajectory and the way that he's improved in the 2 seasons that he was at LSU. It's got people salivating over whether that potential is going to translate to the NFL. And if the trajectory continues, there's no telling how high his ceiling really could be. Now, May also has a tremendously high ceiling. He's heard it's become cliche at this point to compare him to Justin Herbert, but those comparisons have been consistent for the last 6 to 8 months or so. Just physically, 6'4", 230, ideal prototypical quarterback size, has a massive arm, and it has a little mobility to his game too. So I think whoever ends up in the top 3, whatever order they end up going, those 3 franchises should be very excited about who they get.
Jeff Howe from The Athletic is our guest here on Raider Nation Radio 920 Unnecessary Roughness, talking about the top 6 quarterbacks that will go off the board in the upcoming draft at the end of April. When it comes to Jaden Daniels, how much concern was there with his size and the fact that, he took a lot of hits at LSU that you probably don't want to do in the NFL?
Yeah, that's for sure. Just look at there's always these consistent comparisons between Daniels' running style and that of Lamar Jackson, and I think those comparisons are fair, and I've heard it a lot from people in the league. The difference between the 2 players is Jackson is more physically built. It's better physically put together than Daniels is at this point. But then looking at it another way, even as physically impressive or imposing as Jackson is, he still ended 2 of his last 3 seasons early because of injuries. Mm-hmm. And, it doesn't matter how big you are. Those hits can still knock you out for several games at a time, or in Jackson's case, worst case scenario, the last several games of those 2 seasons, except for this last one here. Anthony Richardson is as physically impressive as any quarterback in the NFL, and he got injured, and I think it was 3 of his 4 starts last season before being knocked out for the season. So, yeah, there's absolutely some concern, and that was my biggest question with the Patriots, because their ideal quarterback, they want a big guy. They want somebody who can cut the ball through the wind in December, play at that highest level in January when they had those Super Bowl aspirations. And I asked people who would know, is his size a concern? And they just love the potential. They think everything else outweighs whatever concerns there are about his frame. 6'3" would be his expected height, and I'm disappointed just from an entertainment or value standpoint that he didn't weigh in at the combine. But people were thinking that it was going to be somewhere around 200 pounds.
I want to ask you about the second tier of 3 quarterbacks. You're looking at McCarthy, Nix, and Michael Penix. With J.J. McCarthy, there's a lot of questions because of what he didn't do at Michigan. But what he did do at Michigan was win, and he obviously won the national championship game. Where is the overall feelings of who J.J. McCarthy could be on the next level, especially since he was coached up by Jim Harbaugh, who is an NFL head coach?
Yeah, he's somebody whose name I heard so much of going in or throughout last week, and it was, hey, you know what? When they throw on Saturday, his stock is really going to rise. And there were people who believed that he's got the ceiling of a potential top 5 pick. And I think that there's some caution there because there is a pretty big gap between Daniels and McCarthy from everybody I spoke to. But when you need a quarterback, and as we've seen in this salary structure since the rookie wage scale about 12 or so years ago, you can be more aggressive if there's that guy that you like. Of course, you're still going to be, if that means moving up, you still have to make sure that you are fully committed to that guy because it might cost you a couple first-round picks. But you're right. It's about what he didn't do, and it's probably more of a projection because it was such a run-heavy offense. But people love the arm, or I should say really like the arm, and they love the character. They love the leadership. He played well in some clutch moments, and he's a guy who was kind of built to play with the spotlight around him. He's been used to it for a few years at this point. So the question is, okay, yeah, they know he can throw the ball, but they don't know what it looks like in a pass-heavy offense that you're going to have to need to win at an NFL level. Now you get him in there, you give him a good running game, like all these rookie quarterbacks are going to need. Any quarterback's going to need a good running game, but especially the younger ones. You get him in there with a good complementary run game and a good offensive line, you give him a chance that he could potentially start as a rookie. But, I thought that maybe like a top 20 pick, but I thought the buzz around him was so strong last week that I would be shocked if he fell out of the top 12. But again, it's not that long of a shot to think that he could be a top 5.
You know, it's funny, Jeff. It feels like that when it's all said and done, we can look at the top 15 and see like all 6 quarterbacks off the board in the top 15. That would be a lot, but I could see it because so many teams that need quarterbacks, and there's so many different kind of flavors of quarterbacks in this year's draft.
Yeah, I think that's a long shot. I think the absolute cap would be 5. I mean, the people I've spoken to, a lot of the same things about McCarthy can be said about Nix. Not as good of an arm from Nix. But, if somebody's desperate enough and you've got that group, I would say starting with the Falcons, who I think are at 8, the Raiders, of course, at 13, but there's several more. You got the Vikings, the Broncos, some teams in the back half of the teams, or even going into the early 20s who could even be like a stash and save type of situation where you get them and you develop them and you let that veteran that they have kind of ride out the next season. Like, there are a handful of possibilities for teams to jump up. I mean, McCarthy, I would expect somebody's going to trade up for McCarthy, wherever it happens to be, whether it's at 4, 5, or 9. I would expect McCarthy to be a trade target. Nix could potentially get there too. I think the tough thing with Penix, who is, the consensus at this point is the 6th best quarterback in the draft, at least from the people I've spoken to. Everybody loved him, and he really, really started to soar up draft boards as the college football season was progressing. And then he had that national championship performance, and it really just exacerbated some of the concerns with him. When he was under pressure, which nobody will fault him for against that Michigan defensive front, but when he was under pressure, the footwork broke down, the mechanics broke down. You saw a quarterback who went from being incredibly accurate, threw with a great deal of confidence, made so many clutch plays in tight moments last season. The accuracy wasn't there against Michigan. And then the beating that he was taking because of that pass rush, you could see him hobbling to the sideline those last, 2, 3, 4 series of the national championship game. And for a guy who had 4 college football seasons end with injuries, including 2 torn ACLs, it's tough to see a guy get beat up as badly as he did. Not that he suffered a major injury in that game or anything, but again, it just brought to light a lot of the concerns. And he's somebody who, somebody told me in December that Penix was a guy that if a team was desperate enough and missed out on their top 5, maybe, a long shot, but possibly jump into the back half of the back end of the first round if they didn't want to wait all day on Friday for Penix. But now it's a point where, I think he's getting closer to that fringe 2nd, 3rd round grade. Wow. And, if the Raiders don't get their guy in the first round, I think Penix would probably be there for them in that spot in the 40s, wherever they're at.
Wow, yeah, the Raiders was there at 44, and I was looking at that earlier thinking, I wonder if he's possible could make it to round 2, and I figured with all the desperation from teams that need quarterbacks that he wouldn't make it all the way to 44, but it sounds like there's a possibility that maybe they go defense at 13 and go with the quarterback at 44 if their first quarterback's not there for him, which obviously would be Jaden Daniels in my opinion.
Yeah, you don't want to force the issue at that position. I mean, I covered this is not apples to apples or whatever, but covering Mac Jones and the Patriots situation out here in New England, I mean, that thing fell apart because of coaching and, the way that relationship deteriorated. Although that's a bad example because they stayed put at 15. So I digress here. But like, if you really force it, you take a guy that necessarily know you want to take, then it sets everything back a couple of years at least. So the Raiders are in a weird spot where, a month ago they probably thought they had a decent chance at Jaden Daniels. And if they didn't, they thought maybe, hey, you know what, maybe trade up to the 5 or 6 area. But now at this point, I don't see, again, assuming that my read here is correct and those 3 guys go off the board, I can't see why any of those 3 teams would trade as far back as 13 because then the quality of the quarterback or who they want to be available, like the Patriots, for instance, if they trade back, if all of a sudden they have a major change of heart and they don't want that 3rd quarterback, whether it's May or Daniels, they're still going to want to be in position to get one of those top 2 tackles or one of the top 3 wide receivers. All those guys are going to be off the board at 13. So the Raiders have found themselves in probably a more tricky spot than they probably realized or projected as of a month ago.
So there was the conversation I had on Monday with Jeff Howe from The Athletic. Very informative. Again, I thought that the conversation was great because it wasn't just how he was looking at these quarterbacks and he was lining them up and giving his thoughts. It was actual talent evaluators. It was actual coaches in the National Football League that he got an opportunity to talk with. I think that carries a lot more weight. Mentioned it last week while I was at the scouting combine in Indy, and this is actually something that Brother Marquise in the 305 rep in Miami one time hit me up and asked me to ask while I was at the combine, and I did, and I got an answer that he actually expected, and I didn't. I was kind of caught off guard by it, but, when we talk about draft boards and players shooting up or coming down draft boards, like, are they really doing that, or are they just coming up as far as the media's draft boards or dropping down the media's draft boards? And Jordan Reed from ESPN, he said, no, the NFL evaluators, they already have a great idea of what they're looking at, right? It's just now getting on our radar because we're so busy doing other things that we're not paying attention to all these guys as close as these evaluators are. So, yeah, when you hear that term, oh, this guy's shooting up the draft boards, not really shooting up evaluators' draft boards. You're shooting up media's draft boards. So guys that are just now locking in on the draft, guys like me, when I say I'm not talking about the draft in November, but I will in the end of January. Yeah, that's why guys start shooting up my board at that point. It was a great point that Brother Marquise brought up, and I was glad that I was able to ask Jordan Reed, and I asked multiple guys while I was at the combine, and they all basically had the same answer. So well done by him, but I thought that was a really good conversation I had with Jeff Howe about the top 6 quarterbacks and where they could potentially end up, and even how it pertains to the silver and black. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts. You're off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. The NFL season is behind us. We know March Madness is around the corner, but also the NBA playoffs is right around the corner as well. You can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bets. $150 if your bet wins, just like that. And you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and a whole lot more. Don't look now, but the Milwaukee Bucks are on a roll, right? Has Doc Rivers figured it out? They're winning games now coming out the All-Star break. Matter of fact, 6 in a row now? They slid back into the second place now in the East. Look out for them. The Warriors, they're taking whoopings, right? The Boston Celtics put it on them on Sunday, so they're taking a step back. The Lakers, they're still taking steps back. Who is going to be that team to make a run? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. You're guaranteed to miss a shot you don't take. Visit FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with Lodi, California Raider. He's calling to talk about Russell Wilson now that we know he'll be officially released and if the Raiders should make a move for him. Here he is, Lodi, California Raider.
Hey, what up, Q? Not really Raider related, but I wanted to find out your thoughts about Russell Wilson now not being eliminated from the Broncos, and do we go after him? Now, I know everybody wants the franchise quarterback, the top 3, the Jaden Daniels, which I would like also, but can we realistically get there, and still try to have a decent draft? I mean, we still have some holes to fill. I mean, is it smart to build a defense that can stop Kansas City and then pick up somebody like a Russell Wilson who can manage the offense for us on the cheap, trying to battle it out with Aiden O'Connell, and then maybe picking up somebody like Joey Milton, who's a project, along with the guy on the kid already on the practice squad, Anthony Brown. Anyway, your thoughts on that? What I call for your Raider out.
Thank you for the call, my man. I appreciate you, and I think the Raiders should do everything in their power to trade up to 2 to 3 to get their guy. Obviously, that's not guaranteed to happen. The price for Russell will be very affordable. At least it should be. He's getting paid by the Broncos. I think the Raiders will definitely continue to build their team, especially their defense, in my opinion. The team is talented enough. If they're going to make a move for that franchise quarterback, if they're going to go all the way up to that number 2 or 3 spot, I would think that now is the time to do it just because the team is very talented. But I think Russell Wilson is a guy that they'll probably kick the tires on because he'll be affordable. He's a vet. He's been there, done that. He may have a chip on his shoulder if he's worth the salt. Now, he might not. He might be satisfied with his career and just whatever, and he's satisfied with being Sierra's husband. Maybe that's his deal. I don't know. But if he's worth the salt and has a little bit of, pride about his game and where he's at right now, he might have a little something to prove. but I think the Raiders will figure that out quick, fast, in a hurry if they actually get a chance to sit down and talk with them. But thanks so much for that call. I definitely appreciate you. Next up, got a text from Guareb. He says, "Hey, Q, it's Guareb. We must be the biggest fools as Raider fans to think we can move up and get Jaden Daniels. Even if the Patriots trade back or whoever, just from all the insiders you guys interview, they don't even mention the Raiders moving up unless you guys bring it up. Just know if it were Andy Reid at 13 looking to move up for a quarterback, you would have everyone there parting the Red Sea for him to move up. But as usual, when it's the Raiders, it's too hard. It's this is this or it's this is that. Just know that O'Connell played nothing but backup quarterbacks except for Mahomes. The Raiders will not beat the Chiefs like that again. Just prepare yourselves for another retread at quarterback or a settled quarterback in a draft. I can't help but see more mediocrity for this organization, and next year there'll be another few teams that need quarterbacks, so stuck we are. I don't even think AP is confident about drafting Jaden Daniels like you guys see it." That's from Guareb. Very positive text there. Not really. Lengthy text. Thank you so much. Sorry, I got a little stumbled up in the middle of it, but that's not actually correct. There are people that are talking about the Raiders trading up from 13 to 3 that aren't being talked about because we ask them. That's what you hear, but there's plenty of people that have brought that up to me. As a matter of fact, if you go check out Doug Farrar from the USA Today, he put a post-combine mock draft out on Sunday, as a matter of fact, where he actually had the Raiders trading up with the pass to number 3 and grabbing Jaden Daniels. That wasn't based off my conversation. That wasn't based off someone else's interview. That was based off of him just kind of throwing a twist in there and talking about trades. If you notice, most of the mock drafts that are out right now don't do trades. When I do mock drafts, I don't do trades either because you just never know where the trade is going to come from. So unless the trade is already done, I'm not going to do one. Most mock drafts don't, but the possibility is definitely there. They're obviously interested in making a trade. It's going to be very difficult, like Deshaun Reed and Vic Tafur said, to move up, but, I mean, it could be done. And again, go check out Doug Farrar. I challenge you. Go check him out from USA Today. He literally put out a post-combine mock draft where he had the Raiders taking Jaden Daniels, trading up to number 3 with New England to go get him. So that had nothing to do with me. So I actually believe that is incorrect, the information that you're passing along and saying that it's just us generated. It's definitely not just us generated. That might be all that you're hearing, and that's fine, but that's not where it's at. But thank you so much for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Big Drew in H-Town. He's calling to talk about some additions the Raiders can make to increase the talent on the defensive side of things and how that'd help in a major way to make the defense better that'll ultimately help the Raiders win games, especially versus Kansas City. Here he is, Big Drew in H-Town.
Yo, what up, Q? This is Big Drew calling out of Houston. Just want to say really quick, appreciate everything that you do. Favorite podcast of all time, but especially in the off season, man, I think as a Raider fan, we just live for this, sad to say, but podcast is just super exciting right now with all the off-season hype, free agency hype, pre-draft hype. Love it, man. Anyway, just really want to quickly say how awesome would it be if we could bring in a stud defensive tackle and maybe draft a corner or vice versa. But I say bring in a defensive tackle in free agency, obviously because of Christian Wilkins, and that would be an awesome addition to our team. And imagine if we could I honestly think that if we can add a stud defensive tackle like that and then pick up one of these corners out of Bama or Toledo. I know I don't have to tell you or your listeners about them as you've been preaching about them, and I love it, man. Absolutely love it. But imagine we were to bring those two guys in. I understand that we still have to fix the quarterback situation, but if we were to bring those two guys in, I truly believe we'd go from a top 10 defense to a top 5 defense, if remaining healthy. Anyway, just wanted to throw that idea out there. Big Drew out. Peace.
Drew, thanks for the call. Appreciate you. There's no doubt a big-time defensive tackle is a much-needed addition to the Raiders' defense, whether you get that guy in the draft, like a Byron Murphy from Texas, or a free agency, like a Christian Wilkins from Miami, right? I mean, you got to be able to increase that interior pressure. You've got to be able to not allow a guy like Patrick Mahomes to step up in the pocket. If you can stop that, if you can cut that off, you give yourselves an opportunity. You give Max Crosby an opportunity to get home. You give Tyree Wilson an opportunity to get home. Malcolm Kuntz coming off the edge with that speed rush, a chance to get home. That's big time right there. We know Wilkins is not going to be tagged by the Dolphins, so maybe that's the direction you go. Matabuke was my favorite defensive tackle free agent. He's going to get tagged by the Baltimore Ravens. I like Murphy a lot. If they can't go get their quarterback, then maybe Murphy is the guy that they go draft out of the University of Texas. And you know what? I'd be okay with that. If they end up with Murphy after the end of the first round, I'd be good with that. Now they've got to figure out what they're going to do with the quarterback position, but man, you know that defense will be that much better with a dude like Murphy in the middle of the interior line. A true number one quarterback to go with Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs, that would be good as well. Something Antonio Pierce mentioned last week while we were at the scouting combine. Maybe a guy like a Terrion Arnold, maybe a guy like a Quinyon Mitchell or others, right? There's other cornerbacks, again, very deep class. So there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of directions the Raiders can go to increase that defense and increase their team's overall value and their abilities. But they still have to, end of the day, find a quarterback to be their guy, whether it's a vet, a rookie, or they feel like they can continue to build around Aiden O'Connell. They've got to make some kind of decision. But Big Drew, thanks for the call. Appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Miller in Chico. It's a pretty lengthy text. It says, Q, free agents I'd love to see the Raiders go after, not named Chris Jones. A, linebacker Jordan Brooks. The Raiders have unsettled at the linebacker position for a while. Spillane has been a revelation. He's on a 2-year deal, and Diablo is a starter grade, but with the injury history. So Jordan Brooks is a guy he would look to see. B, safety Cameron Curl. Guy has a high Pro Football Focus grade, and Raiders safeties are on last year of their deals. Epps is a Jag, and the Horned Frog needs another good year before re-signing. I'll say this. I don't think Epps is a Jag, which is just another guy. I think Epps is really good. I think he is, and he brought a lot of, I think, intensity to the Raiders' defense, and he helped Trayvon Merrick play at a higher level, and that's the Horned Frog that you're talking about. Also, he goes on to say, C, guard Robert Hunt, again, solid Pro Football Focus grade, only 26 years old, and plugs up a glaring need for the silver and black. I can see a guard, right? I think that the Raiders need a lot of offensive line help. Tom Telesco said that they're going to be active in free agency. I can see them doing that along the offensive line. The tackles aren't real deep in free agency, but there are some guards, including Robert Hunt, that they could definitely go out there and get. Goes on to say all three are young, could be valuable pieces of a core going forward. The draft, unless we get Jaden, would love to see the Raiders hold tight at 13 and draft one of the mammoth tackles available or Byron Murphy. Trade back in the late first or early second and get your quarterback Penix or McCarthy. And can we stop the Russell Wilson talk? Can you really see him smoking cigars in the locker room with the boys? Not a culture fit and a retread. That's Miller from Chico. Thanks for the text, the lengthy text. I appreciate you. Great detail. And look, I know Russell Wilson is not the sexiest idea. I get it. And I know that, no, he's not going to be in the locker room smoking cigars. But you know what? Neither is Hunter Renfrow. He's not in the locker room smoking cigars. He's in the locker room getting dressed and getting up out of there. But you know what matters is winning. And so if the Raiders find a way to bring in Russell Wilson, get him on the cheap, and they start winning games, no, he's not going to be smoking cigars because everyone doesn't. But he'll be in the locker room excited and cheering on the wins with his teammates, and I believe his teammates would be in the locker room cheering him on as well. That's the one thing about locker rooms, man, not just NFL locker rooms, but any locker room in general or in any workplace. People come from all different walks of life. Everyone doesn't have to be the same person. Matter of fact, if you are the same person, everyone's the same person, it's kind of boring, right? So everyone has their own personalities. Some guys do smoke the cigars in the locker room. Some guys just hold the cigars and don't smoke them at all. Some guys will tell you that they don't like cigar smoke, period, right? But they'll still be in the locker room celebrating because they're having a good time and they're winning games. So I don't think that is the, oh, well, he doesn't smoke cigars, he wouldn't get down like that, he's not going to be a fit. If he can help the team win, that's all that matters at the end of the day. The Raiders have not won consistently in so long that they don't really have the right to say, oh, this guy is not a fit with what we want to do post-game when we win. They haven't won enough to talk about what they're going to do all the time after wins. So I just think that that's one of those misconceptions that he wouldn't fit in the locker room. The one thing I know is winning is the ultimate deodorant and cures all. So thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. We'll close things out with a call from Jordan in Oregon. He's calling to respond to the weekend that was the Combine. Had a few thoughts on some quarterbacks that we talked about at the top of the draft, like Jaden Daniels and also Michael Penix. Here he is, Jordan in Oregon.
Hey, what's going on, Q? Jordan from Oregon calling in here. This Monday after the Combine. Good pod. Just wanted to chime in on a couple of quick hits that some stuff I took away from this weekend. And yeah, I agree with you. First off, Daniels or Penix, both of those would definitely have kind of narrowed it down as my options that I would hope the Raiders would go after as well. If they can't get to the number 2 spot, then you need to start looking at what it's going to take to get Penix. And Penix, great personality. I've followed a lot of his games, just watching a lot of the Ducks games in Pac-12, and I mean, the guy has checked every box. And if I wouldn't have known he was injured, let's say, no one had made that big news that his time at Indiana, he'd gotten injured. I wouldn't have even known it. He's got, I was always expecting there'd be a time where his game would drop off and you'd be like, see, this is just a fluke. But that really never happened until the national championship when they were, obviously, playing one of the better teams in the country. And so, my takeaway is whatever they got to do to put themselves in a position that they're going to know if Daniels is off the table here pretty quick. And if they need to position themselves, you're going to want to get it maybe even ahead of the Falcons, Broncos, teams like that. If they have big interest in Penix as well, you might have to do what some would say, overdraft him, which, if you think he's your franchise guy, no one's ever going to look back and say that's a bad move to get in front of some of these other QBs or front of some of these other teams that need a QB. And so I've been seeing a lot of, people think he's going to last to like pick 40, and I just don't see that happening after the combine and, especially his interviews and stuff. He'd be my top choice after Daniels at this point. And so, hey, the last thing I want to touch on is the Fields to the Raiders just won't go away. That story seems like every time it kind of doesn't have any legs, somebody else with actual credibility reports on again. And, here we are again in Monday, and people are acting like that still has legs. And so, I just wanted to say that that's an intriguing possibility for Raiders as well. I think it's important to, if you just throw out everything he did with the Bears and just chalk it up as that's an organization that just wasn't set up for success. Just throw that tape away. Go back to what he was looking like coming out of college. I think that's what you kind of need to do with him. And man, I would have been saying do whatever it takes to get him when he was coming out. He was, I was surprised the Niners didn't take him instead of Trey Lance. That was what I thought they were moving up to do. But anyway, man, that's what I got for you. Peace out.
Thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. And yeah, I had a few people tell me Penix was going to drop or could drop. I don't see it, but you heard from Jeff Howe in segment number 2, and he thinks he's going to drop as well. Jaden Daniels is clearly QB1. And as far as Fields goes, there's plenty of conversation around him, but not much of a market for him. The options the Bears have right now is minimal. Not to mention the draft capital that they want to get in return is going to continue to decrease the longer that they hold on to him. I think that they've got to come up with something sooner rather than later, but right now they don't have that big market for him. So we'll see what the Bears end up settling for when they move on from Justin Fields. I just don't know where the best fit for him is. I keep thinking it's going to be Atlanta, but then I keep hearing Atlanta could be tied with Kirk Cousins as well. So, if one goes one place, then okay, then there's another opening somewhere else for possibly a Justin Fields signing. I don't know. I don't know who's going to make the trade, who's going to pull the trigger on Justin Fields, but we will see, right? It's going to be very interesting and intriguing to see where the veterans quarterbacks go and how that affects what happens in the draft at the end of April. That was kind of a quick one, so we'll take one more text from Florida Raider. Hey, Q and Ari, you start my day and end it with the Raiders podcast. Much respect to all that you do. Florida Raider here, listening since you started. Hope the Raiders don't give away the farm for anything but Jaden Daniels, but think a pick number 2 is inevitable. Let the chips fall, and if we get Nix or McCarthy, let's do it. Who would you rather have out of the two? And let Aiden O'Connell compete. What's your thoughts? Much respect to you and Ari for being the eyes and ears of Raider Nation. Q, I think one day we'll be watching you live on ESPN as the NFL analyst like SVP. You belong there, like you say, love on your family, and just win, baby. That's from Florida Raider. Thanks for the compliments. I do appreciate you. Thanks for the text as well. As far as McCarthy or Nix, I'd rather have McCarthy. I'm not big on Nix, and I'm really not big on Nix after the attitude he gave my guy Vinny Bonsignore at the Combine last week. But I think McCarthy probably – I'd like him a little bit better only because he's a young dude and he was coached up by Jim Harbaugh, but I'm really not a big fan of either one of those guys. Aiden O'Connell is definitely going to be competing with anybody. There's going to be a veteran, I believe, added to the mix. I don't know who that's going to be, Russell Wilson or someone else. I don't know who that is. I'm not trying to force Russell Wilson on anybody. I just think with his availability and his cheap price tag that he's going to be a guy that they at least talk to. But obviously, we all know how I feel. Jaden Daniels is my guy, and I hope that that's who the Raiders go and decide to go get. If not, find a way to get Michael Penix and continue to have that strong run game and let Penix stretch the field with that strong arm. That's what I got, and I'll tell you right now, if I ever become a guy that's on ESPN on the regular, able to talk NFL all day or, doing some sideline reporting, this, that, and the other, we all kind of know, the trajectory that I'd like to go down, that'd be a blessing. Everything that I can do and anything I can do on the daily, whatever it is, whatever I'm afforded the opportunity to do, I'll definitely appreciate, and I will not take for granted. So thanks so much for the compliments. I do appreciate you, and thanks for the feedback as well. That's going to do it for today's show. Coming up tomorrow, we'll have more calls and texts. We have that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. We'll have more news and notes of the day, and of course, plenty of conversation here as we do on the daily. Big ups to my man Jeff Howe that had a great breakdown of the top 6 quarterbacks in this year's upcoming NFL draft. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.